Okay, so for this video, we're going to explain how fiscal policy works. All right, so these policies are implemented by the government. So the government wants to achieve a set of macroeconomic objectives, right? This is what they want to get. So if the economy encounters any problems, right, or if it's going through any setbacks or recessions, then the government will be there to implement these policies so that it is still steering the economy in that direction. So what the government wants would be things like high economic growth rate. It wants a low unemployment rate. It wants a low and stable inflation, right? So we want the economy to be growing on a regular basis. We want people to have jobs, right? Only a small proportion would not be able to find jobs. That is still considered normal, acceptable. And we want inflation rate to be positive, right? So with economic growth, there will tend to be higher and higher prices every year, but it should not be out of control, right? So as a benchmark, as a rule of thumb, right? So it's about 2 to 3% every year of inflation would be considered as more or less acceptable. But if it exceeds that, then it will be sort of a problem, right? And that is where the fiscal policies will come in. So we say that we have experienced major setbacks such as a financial crisis, right, between 2008 and 2009. And we also have, let's say, recently the COVID situation back in 2020, right? So a lot of the fiscal policies were used so that the economy did not suffer even more, right? So first thing, we say that for fiscal policies, this is on the demand side, right? So we have the demand side policies such as fiscal policies and monetary policies. So these policies will affect the aggregate demand of the economy, right? So if you remember in the previous video, we say that for the economy itself, right, on the demand side, we have different factors, we have different parties who make up the demand for goods and services in the whole economy, right? So we have the consumers or the households, right? These people, they buy goods and services, right? So people like us, we buy goods and services on a regular basis, on a daily basis, right? This is one part of the economy. We also have the firms. So we say that for the firms, they engage in investment spending, right? So investment spending would be where they buy machineries to invest into the future so that they can produce more products in the future, right? And government spending is another component of this aggregate demand, right? So government as a party is also buying goods and services. It could hire teachers, right? It could hire doctors to work in the public sector, right? It could also spend money to build more infrastructure, let's say highways and also airports. So all these are part of the government spending, right? So in a way, the government is also contributing to the economy. Then the last part here will be from the foreigners, where they buy the exports of an economy, right? So when we are producing goods and services, not only are the domestic people, domestic parties buying, we also have the foreigners buying products from us, right? So the more we sell to them, the more that we are earning from them as well. So in terms of the government fiscal policy, we say that they can be through different channels, right? Because for aggregate demand, we have four main different categories. So the government can actually affect the economy through any of these different channels. So first one here, we say that it could be through the government spending, right? So government spending would be the government spending more and more money, right, to boost the aggregate demand in the economy. So within the economy itself, the government is a major player, but on a day-to-day basis, if the government is taking a more prudent approach, they wouldn't be spending aggressively unless needed, right? Like in Singapore's case, they usually tend to take a more cautious approach. So that is also why we were able to have a major reserve, right, to spend during the COVID situation, okay, when the government could actually take out to spend to help the economy recover faster, right? Around back in 2020, 2021. Okay, so government spending, when it increases, right, the aggregate demand is also increasing. Okay, so that alone would help to boost the level of spending in the economy, and then it would actually help to raise the level of aggregate demand. Right. So if you were to go deeper, we can say that the government spending can be categorized into two main areas. We have the current expenditure and we also have the capital expenditure. Right. So for current expenditure, These will be things consumed in the current period, right? So, for example, the output of the workers in the public sector, right? So, if the workers are working right now, right, let's say a teacher producing a teaching service, then this service is consumed by the students at the current moment, right? So, this is considered a current consumption or current expenditure. Then on the other side, a capital expenditure by the government would be building things like the roads, the hospitals, the highways. So all these here, they may not be consumed for the future, but they are produced right now with the future in mind, right? So we're going to produce these items so that in the future we can use, and in the future it benefits the economy as well, right? So as a whole, government spending is where they spend to on different areas, right? So that they can help the economy. Okay. Then in this case, we have to talk about the budget balance, right? So in terms of budget balance, there are few positions that the government could possibly be in, right? So we have the case of a budget deficit, right? Budget deficit is where the government is spending more than it earns. Okay, so depending on the government's situation, right? So if let's say now they are in the midst of a recession, a midst of a financial crisis, then the government's objective may be to help the economy to recover faster. So in that case, it may very possibly run into a deficit, right? Because when it is spending very aggressively, it will have to it may be spending more than what it earns or what it collects from the tax revenue. So in that case, the government could run into a deficit, right? Then with a budget surplus, that is where usually in a better year, right, in the economy may be doing well in that year, so the government doesn't have to spend as much, right? And because people are working, they are collecting. The government is collecting higher tax revenue, so it is able to generate higher return or higher income compared to the expenditure. So then, in that case, the government will run into a budget surplus, right, where its revenue exceeds its expenditure. Then for a balanced budget, this would be when the government's spending is equal to the revenue itself. Okay, so each of these may be possible, right? So for the government, we may need to see what situation is it facing, what policies are they implementing right now in order to achieve their goals. So in the gist of it, if the economy is doing well now, then the government is more likely to run a budget surplus because it doesn't have to spend as aggressively, and people are working and earning higher incomes, so it can collect more tax revenue, right? Conversely, if the economy is not doing as well right now, then it may run into the situation of the budget deficit. The government will have to spend more in order to help the economy tide through this period, and it may not be able to collect as much tax revenue because more people are unemployed, right? So these are the different positions. Okay, so another component of the fiscal policy would be the income tax. Okay, so income tax, we can broadly split into the personal income tax and also the corporate income tax. Right, so personal income tax, we see that it affects the consumers or it affects the workers, right? So in Singapore's case, we adopt this thing called a progressive tax system, right? Where if your income bracket is at a higher tier or you fall into a higher income bracket, then your tax percentage will be higher. So not only is the amount that you are paying higher if you earn a higher income, the tax percentage applied is also going to be higher, right? So in this way, it's going to help to reduce the income gap in the economy, right? So we say that for income tax, it's going to affect the disposable income, right? So whatever we earn, right, is the nominal income minus away the income tax that we pay. This will be the disposable income, right? So after paying off taxes, whatever is left will become the consumers or the workers' disposable income, right? That is available for them to spend in any way that they desire. Okay, so if, for example, today the government reduces the income tax, right, then we will see a higher consumption spending in the economy. The households are able to spend more, right, because they have more money left over after paying for taxes. So conversely, if the government raises the income tax, And the purpose here is probably to collect higher income tax revenue and also to reduce the level of income gap in the economy, right? So those affected, those who are paying more high income tax, we are going to see them reduce the consumption a bit because they will have less amount to spend, right? So this is where income tax affects the consumption. Now, on the other side, we also have the corporate income tax. Okay, so corporate income tax, this will affect the firm's profits after tax, right? So this is not affecting the consumers but the firms. So the firms will pay corporate income tax after they derive their final tax amount, right? So using the revenue minus all the costs that they incur through the conduct of the business, right? Whatever amount is left, this is the profits itself. So these profits, the government will then apply the tax percentage to see how much the firm has to pay to the government. Okay, so the higher the tax amount, right? The higher the tax amount, the more that the firm has to pay to the government, and that gives them less in order to actually buy capital goods, right? So capital goods will be the machineries, will be the equipments that they use. So if they are left with less money after paying the corporate tax, then the firms will not be able to spend as much on the capital goods, right? Or on the machineries. So that will reduce the level of investment spending in the economy. Okay, so all this here we can take the ceteris paribus assumption, right? If you guys recall from the first video, we say that for ceteris paribus, it is where all things are held constant, right? So whenever we implement some changes, right? If we want to look at the direct impact, we will assume that everything else that could affect the economy in this case will remain constant. So personal income tax alone, right? Suppose all else the same, it would affect the level of consumption spending. On the other side, with corporate income tax, it is going to affect the firm's investment spending on a ceteris paribus assumption. Okay, so we saw the example here where there is a tax cut in Australia in 2018, right? So in that case, then it's going to attract more firms to come in. That's one, right? So if firms or MNCs are looking for a country to set up in, then just based on this tax cut alone, right, if we disregard the other factors, then they may choose to enter Australia because they're able to save on the taxes. Okay, so that could be one reason for this move. Now, looking at all the different tools, right, that we have gone through, so we are able to classify them into broadly the expansionary fiscal policies, and later on we talk about the contractionary fiscal policies, right? The word expansionary here comes from the root word expand. Expand means to get bigger, right? So in the economy context, we say that this is where the economy is set to expand, to grow. So the government wants to grow the economy because right now it is not growing as much as it should. Okay, so if the government sees that it is not growing as fast, or it is growing too slowly, or even it is facing a recession where growth is negative, then it will implement expansionary fiscal policies, right? So these policies here, the tools involved would include things like increased government spending, or they would cut the taxes. So when the government increases the spending, then it's going to push up the aggregate demand, right? So when it pushes up AD, then more people will be buying goods and services. Then in that case, the economy will grow. Or conversely, the government can cut the taxes. So if it cuts the personal income tax or if it cuts the corporate income tax, then it's going to allow the households and the firms to spend more. Okay, so these are the intended purpose, right? So if you look at this diagram, then we can see that this is what it looks like, right, when drawn. So we have the AD curve shifting rightwards. Okay, so AD here represents the level of aggregate demand. So suppose the government raises government spending, it cuts both the personal income tax and the corporate income tax, for example. Then ceteris paribus, right? Everything else the same, just letting these three changes take place, then the level of aggregate demand will increase. Okay, so previously, right, the level of economic growth was not as high. So the benchmark here is based on the LRAS, which we have gone through in the previous video. So we say that for LRAS, this is where it is at the potential output level, right? So the economy can produce up to this level without risking high inflation. So this is sort of like an optimal production level. So if we are not producing at the optimal level, right, whether we are falling short or we are exceeding, then there should be some measures taken to push it back to that optimal level. Okay, so here, because it was at this point which is less than the optimal level, so the government actually wants there to be higher economic growth. So in that case, it pushes the AD curve rightwards through the use of fiscal policy such that it is able to let the economy grow faster. Okay, and therefore it will allow the economy to grow and to get back on track. Okay, so that is the purpose of the expansionary fiscal policy. Now, with a contractionary fiscal policy, we are doing the reverse. So the government here will instead reduce its spending. It will raise taxes, and this will include both the personal income tax and the corporate income tax, right? So this is where AD will be falling. So why do we want the aggregate demand to fall? So in this case, it is not to let economic growth slow down, right? So, but rather we are trying to tackle high inflation. So if we see the case here with the US economy, right, since 2022, we see that there has been very high inflation rates, right? So after the whole COVID incident, where the government implemented a lot of the expansionary policies to help the economy grow faster, they then realized that the inflation rates had actually crept up very silently, right? And it has gone to a very undesirable level, right? I think it was about 8-9%. So in that case, when they finally realized that inflation was too high, right, it may be a bit too late, but they started to scale back on all this spending. Okay, so they started to raise the taxes, they started to reduce the spending so that AD, aggregate demand, will not increase that high. Okay, so it's actually going to pull down, and then inflation rate is always also going to come down, right? And then at this time of recording in 2024, right, we can see that in the US, the inflation rate has actually come down to a more desirable level, right, around 2 to 3%. Okay, then if we were to evaluate fiscal policy, right? So for fiscal policy, we say that with any policy, in fact, there are its pros and cons. Okay, so for fiscal policies, we say that it is good because it can help the economy to recover from recession, right? And more than just that, is actually very flexible. So in Singapore's case, for example, back in 2020, 2021, when the Singapore government decided to implement fiscal policies, its approach was to take out from the reserves, and then on one side, it was giving the firms wage subsidies, right? So for many sectors, because of the nature, right, the customer facing nature of the jobs, such as the in the F&B industry, or let's say in the service sector, in the tourism sector, the airlines as well. So in order to prevent a mass increase in the unemployment levels, the government provided subsidies to the firms, right, to pay off the wages, right? So for the firms during those few months, the wage cost was very significantly subsidized, and it was able to keep the workers on the payroll because these people were technically not working, they were staying at home, and the firms had this very high likelihood of retrenching them, right? So to prevent all this, the government came in to give the wage subsidies. On the other side, they also provided a lot of the cash payouts to the households, right? So we give them the money, especially if you lose your job during that period, we'll give you more subsidies, more cash payouts on top of what everyone should be getting. Okay, so then it will allow you to spend more uh, on necessities, of course, but in that case, it will prevent the consumption spending from decreasing significantly, right? And it will help people to tide through that period. Okay, so it's very it can be very flexible, very focused, right? In terms of what and how much they want to do, right, is really up to the government to think, right, and then to implement those policies. Okay, but however, of course, with this policy, there are certain drawbacks, right? So we say that one of it is this effect called the crowding out effect, right? So based on theory, it says that if the government is borrowing, right, if it's borrowing to spend more, so on one side, the government spending will be increasing, okay, because the government is now borrowing from the banks to spend more. This borrowing will, however, increase the demand for loans, right? Because now the government is also coming in to borrow more aggressively. So in that case, it is going to raise the interest rates in the economy, right? So think of interest rates as the price of money. So when more and more people, borrowers, are coming in to borrow money from the banks, they are in the position to raise the interest rates, right? So the moment interest rates are higher as a result, the private side, right, the consumers, the households, um, the firms, they are going to borrow less. Okay, so they're going to borrow less because the government has pushed up the interest rates, right? So in that case, because these parties are borrowing less, they will be spending less as a result. Okay, so then as a result, there will be a decrease in the investment spending and the consumption spending. Okay, so while government spending is higher, consumption and investment spending are lower as a result. So that would actually limit the amount of increase in the aggregate demand, right? So there will be a corresponding drop in AD while the government spending could have increased AD, right? So this limits how useful the policy is because of the crowding out effect. Okay, then we also say things like there is a time lag in the policies, right? So from the moment that they recognize the problem, such as high inflation or slowing down of the economic growth, right? All these would take time for the governments or whichever bodies to actually recognize. So there is already some time lag in this period, right? Then after that, they need to come up with a specific approach to actually address this problem. So that will take some time again. And finally, when they've eventually implement the policies, right, for the policies to take effect, it will also take time. So this is a setback of the policy, of the fiscal policy, because from the moment that the problem occurs until the policy eventually takes effect, it could be several weeks or even months, right? So during this period, the economy's situation could change, and by the time the policy is implemented, it may not be the best policy anymore, right? Because of the time delay. Okay. And we also say that there is this thing called the multiplier effect, right? Which is very small in countries like Singapore. So the multiplier effect is as such, right? When aggregate demand increases, the overall economy will increase. Okay, economic growth will increase, right? So in that case, the government, for example, would have implemented a policy, and then it would let the economy grow the first round. Okay, so in this case, the national income would have actually increased, and with that, right, there will be higher national income, and all the workers would be spending. Okay, so we come on to automatic stabilizers, the last part of this policy. So automatic stabilizers, this is the portion where the government doesn't have to be very actively involved. It doesn't actually have to do much, right, on a day-to-day basis. Okay, so it's more like once we set it in place, it will just automatically run by itself. Okay, so we have the progressive income tax and also the unemployment benefits, right? These two main channels. So how this works. Now, automatic stabilizers, again, right, it doesn't require the government to do much on a daily basis. Once it is implemented, it will just have a certain effect on its own. So we look at the case with a progressive income tax, right? So progressive income tax, the government implements a higher tax percentage for the higher income earners. All right. So if we are earning more, then the percentage of tax applied will be higher as well. So in that case, when the economy is doing better, right, and more people will be earning more, but also at the same time, there will be a large pool of workers who are still earning lower income, the income gap can actually widen during this period, right? But with the progressive tax, the higher income earners will be paying more, a higher tax percentage, so they will have to pay more in that sense, and that will reduce the disposable income, right? So then they will have a lower income gap in the economy. Okay, so that's one. On the other side, if the economy is not doing as well, then the people will see their incomes dropping, right? So once they fall to a lower income bracket, then it's going to reduce the tax percentage that they are paying. So then in that case, they will be paying less taxes, right? So they are not always paying more taxes. If they're earning less, then they'll be paying less taxes. This will help them to sort of maintain, right, the level of spending that they have. Okay, so when they are earning more, they are not spending very much more because of the higher taxes that they pay. When they earn less, they are not going to spend much less because the tax percentage will also drop, right? So it helps to regulate the level of spending in the economy. Okay, then for unemployment benefits, right, it works similarly. When the economy is doing well, there are fewer people who are unemployed, and there will be fewer people claiming the unemployment benefits, right, such as free cash payouts and so on. So in that sense, for the people who are so when the economy is doing better, right, the people who are earning more, they are not going to collect the income, the unemployment benefits, right? They will just spend from their salary. However, when the economy is doing worse, then they will be able to collect the unemployment benefits, right? And that is where we see that the drop in the income is not going to be as significant. So imagine a person was earning $5,000 per month, and now they are earning nothing because of the loss of the job. The drop in income is more significant, right? But if let's say the government provides unemployment benefits and gives them say $1,000 per month, so they will still be able to afford some basic necessities, right? And also at the same time, the drop in their income will not be as significant. So in that case, the drop in consumption in the economy will not be as dramatic, right? So it is to help to regulate the level of economic activity, right? So that it doesn't go up or down very violently, right, on a regular basis, but it's more smoothed out. Okay, so of course, the pros of such policies or stabilizers are that they can stabilize the level of economic activities, right? But things like a high tax rate, right? So if we are experiencing a good period, the high tax rates will actually discourage the workers from working as hard, because they will see that more hard work put in to earn higher wages will actually result in higher tax payable to the government, right? So it may disincentivize them from working as hard. Okay. Then on the other side, with unemployment benefits, right? You may actually encourage the workers to not find a job, okay? Because they will see that if they don't work, they can still get some money, right? If they do go and work, then the incremental amount in their wages is not actually that significant, right, as to motivate them to go and find a job. Okay, so that could actually lead to more a higher unemployment on a more permanent basis.